right, Pete, so what are your first memories of a grindhouse? Like, what did they look like? And how did you first discover 42nd Street and the grindhouses in New York?
Okay, well, my first memory of a grindhouse was being brought to a kiddie matinee at the Embassy Theater in Orange, New Jersey, which was a big, old, dilapidated theater. These places were, don't forget, you got to remember, all these places, even the ones on 42nd Street, were built around the turn of the century. They used to have like Broadway type shows in there and things like that. Well, then Depression hit and they were all bought up by like chains. They were big. They had like balconies. You would walk in, they'd have a really huge lobby, a really huge candy counter. And in the case of 42nd Street, they'd have all these really garish displays. Like for cannibal films, they'd have like severed heads on these plywood partitions cut out. They'd have like multitude of stills and lobby cards and stuff like that. In some places, they even had a monitor running the trailer out in front to bring people in. The one that really stands in my mind was Make Them Die Slowly, which played at the Liberty Theater on 42nd Street, and it ran for 10 weeks straight. Now you tell me any film today that would run for 10 weeks straight and then be brought back 3 months later to run a couple more weeks.
Wow.
It would never happen. And you know, the whole demographic of 42nd Street was, you know, you say you're coming in from Jersey, walk out of Port Authority, make a left. The first grindhouse you would come in contact with on the corner of 42nd and 8th was the Anco, which is a real, for lack of better words, shithole. Real bad stuff. They would show movies, you know, that would run like maybe 2 days for the tax write-off. Then as you walked up the street, there was more. And it was like, okay, movie theater, adult bookstore, movie theater, liquor store, movie theater, bogus camera store, movie theater, massage parlor, whatever. But, you know, there was enough stuff going on both sides of the street where there was no way you wouldn't go see a movie because there was always something playing. Whether it was spaghetti westerns, horror films, Euro trash films, porn, crime films, Mondo movies. That's all you saw there. And like I said, these theaters were once opulent and they were somewhat kept up to a certain point until the 80s, and they just all started falling into decay. But you had like the Lyric, you had the big etched L in the glass on the front doors and things like that. And then you had, some of them even had chandeliers still up there and things. So, you know, they were almost indestructible, but like toward the end they were pretty grungy, shall we say.
So the Liberty was like, was that the most popular one, you'd say?
They all had their little draw. It seemed like each theater had a little personality. The Liberty just showed some of the most atrocious horror films ever made, like Make Them Die Slowly, Buried Alive, Savage Man, Savage Beast. Another film that ran there for quite a while was Caligula. So they catered to the extreme, and then you had the Rialto and the Victory, which were big porn grinders. There was a story about the Rialto that Blood Feast ran there back in the 60s for 3 months straight.
Wow.
So they all had history. Then the other side you had the Apollo, the Lyric, the Selwyn. I'm trying to think of the other one that was up the block a bit. Might have been one of the Rialtos, but there was just all these theaters just crammed into there. And like the Apollo, I remember Elsa She-Wolf of the SS was a perennial favorite there.
Oh, geez.
That was always there. And just the pairings of these films were like unbelievable. I think in the last issue of GrindhousePurgatory, it might have been, I think it was 13. Somebody actually had a listing from the, I don't know, I'm trying to think now. Went into like the 70s into the 80s, but like a spaghetti western paired with a kung fu film, a kung fu film paired with like Animal House. Just really wild pairings. There was one like it was a Curse triple feature: Curse of the Living Corpse, Curse of Dracula, and Curse of the Werewolf or something. They would just go on themes, and the thing was, there was a huge film depot in New York where I had been talking to Bob Morawski from Grindhouse Pictures, and he showed me a picture of Pieces that was playing at the Rialto, I think at the time. Then right underneath it was The Hills Have Eyes, and he said, well, why do you think they did that? I says, well, nobody knew what Pieces was. Nobody knew where the Pieces would do business, but they knew The Hills Have Eyes would do business because that was out in the late 70s. Pieces came out in the early 80s. So you know, it was a great time to be a movie lover because all this stuff just kept coming back out and coming back out.
Wow, and how old were you when you first went to 42nd Street? Like, Do you have like memories of going there as a teenager?
Yeah,
or?
well, you know what it was? Like anybody else
What got you over there?
With anybody else in that area, the big draw was underage drinking. Because I was getting served in the village when I was like 15.
Oh.
So that's where we used to go. We'd take the train in and either go to, wind up in the East-West Village or whatever. But one time I went in by myself, and instead of making the right turn to go to the subway, I made the hard left and went up on the corner of 42nd Street. And I'm like, wow, Night of the Living Dead, for a few dollars more, The Bloody Pit of Horror, Ilsa. I mean, all this stuff was just out there. I'm like, wow, it's like a smorgasbord for movie lovers.
And Bloody Pit of Horror, I think you told me, wasn't that one of the first horror films you saw?
That was one of the first Eurotrash ones. The funny story with that was, I went to a kiddie matinee, and that wasn't part of the kiddie matinee. That was like the big feature, the Bloody Pit of Horror and Terror Creatures from the Grave.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there going, man, I want to see this shit. So what I did was, after the kiddie matinee, which was 2 AIP movies, which I completely forget, they were, I think, wait a minute, one was Earth versus the Spider, and the other one might have been War of the Colossal, one of the Colossal Man movies. But when everybody was leaving, I snuck in the back and just sat in the back by myself because they didn't turn the house lights on. So after the kids left, there was about a 15-minute window before that feature started. So I just sat in the back and nobody saw me, and then, okay, people were coming in, and I got to see Bloody Pit of Horror and all that weird torture women shit, and it was like, wow, this is really cool stuff.
Definitely not a kid's movie.
No, not at all.
So there were butts in the chairs. I mean, it wasn't just like a few people seeing these movies. There were a lot of people that would come out to these, right?
Yeah, well, the whole thing was, a lot of these places, I'll give you an example of a porn grinder called the Venus. The Venus opened at 10 o'clock in the morning and closed 7 o'clock in the morning. That gave them a couple hours to sweep up the debris, but the reason was it wasn't only the Venus. You got to remember that New York was always known as the city that never sleeps. Mm-hmm. A guy gets off of work, say 7 o'clock in the morning. He wants to go eat breakfast. After he's done with breakfast, maybe he wants to catch a flick and then go home and go to bed. So most of these places opened up, that early in the morning.
Wow.
So there was always somebody in there. And the other thing was the price. It was like 99 cents during the day. $1 during the day. Yeah, we're talking 70s.
How much was popcorn back then?
I really never ate any of that stuff.
Oh, okay.
I was not stupid. But yeah, it was like, it was also a flop house because, if it was cold outside, you'd have a lot of, they weren't called homeless people then, they were derelicts and drunks and bums. That's what they were. They were complete society's cast off.
Like the winos
and
stuff.
Winos, yeah, the classic winos. So for 99 cents, they'd sneak in there with their 30-cent bottle of T-Bird, sit in the back. They didn't give a shit what was playing. They'd crash. So there was always people in there. Weeknights, packed.
Wow.
The block was never dull. And then, a lot of places, the grindhouses themselves, there was only one that was open 24/7, and that was a porn grinder called the Harem. And that was up on a second floor, which was a really creepy place. And Blackjack Books was like a porn emporium in the middle of the block, which was close to the Liberty, and that was open 24/7. Most of the theaters ran, probably closed, after 1 or after 2, and that was it. But the porn places and a lot of other places, don't forget, the bars stayed open also until 4 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
So you had that.
And when did things change in regard to grindhouse films and films worldwide? So, I mean, the grindhouse era was just in the 70s, right?
Well, here's the thing. You had the Hays Code from, the 30s with all the restrictions on nudity and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Well, what happened was things loosened up. Now, around 1963, 64, a couple of things happened. Herschel Gordon Lewis and Dave Friedman had been making these nudie films. And all of a sudden, Hollywood started incorporating nudity in their films. So what was the taboo they hadn't broken yet? Gore. So they made Blood Feast. Having met the two of them and having been personal friends with Dave Friedman up until the point where he passed away, I learned a lot. And the whole thing was, they never expected this to work. None of them did. They decided, okay, we'll go to the premiere at this drive-in, and it was a huge traffic jam, and they couldn't figure out what it was. It was a line to get into the drive-in.
Wow.
And like I said before, somebody claims, some article I read said that it played the Rialto for 3 months straight.
That's wild.
So that was one thing. Another thing was a little-known black and white film that popped up and got the cover of Famous Monsters of Filmland called The Flesh Eaters. And this was a gory, nasty little monster movie with flesh dissolving off people and these little creatures eating their way through people. And the editor on it was really Metzger, who really made it look good. So that was two things that happened 63, 64. Around 65, you had Fistful of Dollars, the Clint Eastwood spaghetti western. Spaghetti westerns had come in, but usually they ran like the 2-day write-off and then go right to like late night TV. Mm-hmm. So the Eastwood thing just blew everybody away. Plus, if you look at the body count in Fistful of Dollars, it probably surpasses every Halloween made up until date, every Friday the 13th made up until date, and every Elm Street made up until date. That was a huge body count movie. Then it was a quick follow-up with for a few dollars more. Well, the real kicker came in 1969 with Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, because this just blew the shit out of the water with on-screen violence. And Sam's whole deal was he's anti-violence, but he felt showing violence as it would actually happen would basically change people's attitudes. Well, the film got panned horribly, yada yada yada. How many years later? Almost 50 years later, it's considered one of the best films of all times.
Wow.
But right then and there, they panned it. But Peckinpah's slow motion Dance of Death, bang, that became a Grindhouse staple. Everybody was doing the damn thing. It was almost the same like the two other things that happened. And this is before that was The Magnificent Seven and The Dirty Dozen. Mm-hmm. That was another Grindhouse staple because that gave birth to the ensemble cast. And like Magnificent Seven, 4 sequels. Dirty Dozen, they had a couple ones, but they never measured up. But they always had like a group of people against impossible odds, and most of them get killed off by the end. The Expendables, it goes on today.
So it was like a build-up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, leading up to that.
Yeah, everything. I think Roger Corman made the statement after Jaws came out in Star Wars. He said they finally got it. Because they were the only guys that were doing this stuff. Hardly any major, except outside of Universal back in the 30s, was making monster movies. Mm-hmm. They were releasing them from other companies, but they weren't making them. But now it's like, okay, we see the handwriting on the wall. And that's basically, in the mid-'80s, the whole shift. Slasher movies, cheap and easy to make, they flooded the market with it. It was dead, it was over. The soul got ripped right the hell out of it.
No.